Okay, so I think let's kick off. So welcome everyone to our show and tell for the landscape review. This is now, I think, week 17 of the landscape review overall, after we've been through our discovery phase, and we're now in the alpha phase of the landscape review. This is one of many show and tells we've done. We are putting these on YouTube as we go, as we said, so feel free to check back and see what the journey has been so far. I think if we look at what we're going to cover today, so a couple of notes on ground rules first. As we said, we're recording. There'll be space for questions at the end, but do feel free to add questions and comments in the chat as we go along. We'll come back to those, or maybe we'll kind of talk to them if it seems at the right moment as we go. And then there's a quick overview there of what we're going through. So a super brief introduction for those who haven't been to these before about who we are and what we're doing and why. An overview of progress in the last couple of weeks. Lots to tell there from Henry and Marie. And then what we're doing next, and importantly, how people can help, learn more about what we're doing, and hopefully participate as well. So a little bit about CDPS. Many of you will know this already. Launched in June 2020, working across public sector organisations in Wales. Designing and delivering services around the needs of the people who use them is our main aim. We're an arm's length body of Welsh Government. We report our progress quarterly to Welsh Government's Ministerial Digital Board, and bringing many people together across Wales with digital transformation experts and others to hopefully meet that mission one of the Wales digital strategy to improve public services. If we move on now to what our overall project goal is for the landscape review. We're understanding the state of public services, taking a really broad view across many different organisations, understanding what's important for the people we talk to, and then hopefully that allows us to understand how CDPS can best work with those in the wider public sector to really drive that digital strategy forward. A little bit about our team. A little bit from the dog in the background, but you can ignore that. The team on the top row, Suraj is actually away this week, but you'll be hearing from Henry and Marie shortly. And we're ably supported by the second row of faces there, Anne, Phil, Rob, Neris, and Antonio, who also work with us within CDPS. And I'm now going to hand over to Marie, who will tell us about what the goal is for this phase.
Thanks, Rick. So in the discovery phase, we conducted 15 deep dives with different services and identified initial opportunities. So our goal for this next phase, the alpha phase, is to collect evidence speaking to a much broader range of approximately 100 services, and use that evidence to prioritize and delve into the detail of the opportunities we've identified previously, and can develop these opportunities into a costed roadmap. So how are we going about achieving those goals? We're doing a number of things. We're having conversations with lots of different organisations and divisions across Welsh Government, talk about the breadth of services that they deliver and their organisation's approach to tech. From that, we're going on to speak to a representative sample of the services they deliver, to have a bit more information about specific services, how they're run, what tech they use. In the background, we are progressing work on CDPS's potential service offering, and we're using the evidence that we're collecting through our service level conversations to come to a prioritized shortlist for this costed roadmap. We're now more than halfway through our alpha phase. We're in sprint 17 of 20. So our focus at the moment is very much on those service level conversations. So you'll hear a bit more in an instant about what we learned in the last 2 weeks and what we are planning to do in the next 2. So in the last 2 weeks, we've had quite a lot of conversations with a range of organisations and divisions across the Welsh public sector. So particularly with Welsh Government divisions, but also a good number of conversations, sponsored bodies, health and care, local authorities. So yeah, big thank you to everyone who gave up some of their time to talk to us about the landscape review. It was really valuable for us to learn about how you delivered service, and it it allowed us to identify some opportunities that CDPS should consider. So we've contacted over the alpha phase over 120 people, and we've spoken to 26 organizations and divisions. So here we have two sets of targets, on the left for the organizational level conversations, on the right for services. So in terms of organization level, we're doing quite well. We're close to reaching our targets, so we've actually exceeded it for Welsh Government and sponsored bodies. We're close for local government and health and care. We've got a number of conversations in diaries, so we're confident that we can reach those targets. So our focus, as I said, is now on these service level conversations. So we've set targets for these individual areas, but these are stretch goals, and our overall ambition is to talk to 100 services. We've had focus groups with waste management service owners from local authorities. We've had a focus group with digital services and Welsh Government. We've got a few more scheduled over the next couple of weeks, and we're setting up more as we speak. So where we would, our ask of you here is, if you've not already put us in contact with your service owners, we would really appreciate it if you could introduce us. And for those where we have reached out, if you could encourage your service owners to pick a date and attend one of our focus groups, that would be incredibly valuable. I'll now hand over to Henry to talk you through what we've learned in the last 2 weeks.
Thanks, Mary. So similar to the last show and tell, we've just pulled out some themes from the conversations that we've been having over the last 2 weeks, particularly from those kind of breadth of service conversations with leaders of organizations, but also starting to bring in some of those focus group findings as well. So this first opportunity is around opportunities for shared components and potentially more open source working with Welsh services. So we found a few interesting things that that people have talked about on this. We found a couple of examples of places where systems or services or applications already exist, but we don't necessarily have the kind of take up across all organizations that would allow us to get the most out of them. So there was an example there on a fly tipping application developed between Welsh Government and Natural Resources Wales, and how they think there could be some real value in rolling that out to more organizations, but at the moment they've struggled with that kind of change management or collaboration side of it. We've also heard challenges about where there's a similar service delivered across many areas of Wales or many organizations, but where there is significant variation in how people access those services, and that does we wonder if there are opportunities there to have some shared components to fix that. In terms of how people have approached this, we've had some interesting discussions about how different areas are working together on shared components. In some cases, there are some good examples of services shared across many organizations. For example, the NHS Shared Services, which hosts many services for all of the health boards in Wales. But a slightly different approach, we heard, this bottom left quote, from a particular local authority, where they were using a paid platform, which they were then developing their own applications on top of, and then directly sharing their code with a group of other local authorities using that. And that seemed like a really interesting approach for us to understand more on. So we're starting to think about what would be the next steps for us after this review. These things over to the right are very much just examples of things we could do, and we're not, we haven't done that prioritization yet of what the highest value things are. But for example, looking into whether we could take that sharing code approach more wide and as a sort of open source for Wales seems really interesting. Go on to the next slide, please. So the next slide is about improving accessibility. Again, this is something which many services through the discovery and now in the alpha are bringing up as something which they're thinking about and something they're focusing on. And it seems like an area where CDPS could really work with services on this. We think really the way to approach this is through the service standards. Accessibility is a really important part of the service standards for Wales. So here are just some thoughts that we're working on as to how we could help further those service standards and make sure that all services are working to them. So the obvious thing is, first of all, just improving and producing more guidance on what the service standards are and how to actually transform your service to meet them. But then also thinking about, could we publish data on compliance to those to help highlight areas which could use more help, and also thinking about the organisations that we could work with directly to help meet some of those standards. This next one, so this is about linking up data, and particularly the idea of users having to submit the same kind of information, the same kind of forms for many different services. We've called out councils in this slide because that's the people we've spoken to most recently. But again, this has definitely been something which has come up through wider conversations with other areas of Welsh Government too. And again, there are some quotes there showing the kind of different place that some different councils are with this. We've seen some councils have specifically chosen so far not to develop a single sign-on, and instead they're looking at, can they link up individual services to tackle this problem, where other councils we've seen are actually already delivering the majority of their services through a single portal, which is facilitating that kind of linking up of data. So I think this again is coming out as a common theme, and it's something that we're quite interested in. And this again feels like something where we could in the future run a discovery, whether again we'd want to look at how that compares to the other opportunities we could work on. And then the final slide, so the previous few are a bit more specific about particular services or about particular components that we could look at. This is calling out how actually some of the organisations we've spoken to, or quite a few of the organisations we're speaking to, do have these much larger digital transformations in mind. There's an example here of thinking about whether we could transform the examination system of Wales through digital transformation, and the many benefits that we could get there through making this more accessible to different groups of people, reducing the pressure of having to do all exams in one day. And these are some really interesting ideas coming out from this. Other ideas around population health and how digital is a massive enabler there. And again, something that we're thinking about, how could CDPS help in these situations, in these transformations? Are we the best placed to help on these things? We're also thinking about some of the past large transformation projects have sometimes come to challenges, be that with the scope of what they're working on, or trying to bring together lots of different specific users with different needs. And that's something we really want to learn on if we decide to move forward with some of these larger transformations. So in a moment, we're going to just share our service list coming out of those organisation level conversations, and just give a sense of where we're going with that. Just before I pull that up, it's helpful just to flash up this definition of a service that we're using. So again, just highlighting how the definition of a service that we've used is that a service is a set of one or more user journeys intended to allow a user to achieve a goal by interacting with government. We've been using this definition when we go out and speak to organisations to try and define actually what is the set of goals that organisation is helping people with, be that a member of the public or be that another area of government. Can we go on to the next slide, Brittany? So using that definition, we've been speaking to organisations about actually their range of services, and that's something that we've done together through a discussion, thinking about who they help with first of all, and then what are the specific user needs being served. We've been collating that in a service list, and this just gives a summary at the moment of who we've spoken to and how many services there are. I'll call out now that the number of services a particular organisation delivers doesn't necessarily tell us that organisation helps more people or does larger things than another organisation with less services, as there isn't one scale of a service, and some of these individual services support a large proportion of people in Wales. Some of them might support a small number of people on some really complex problems. Instead, this just gives us an idea of actually that range of things that these different areas of government are actually delivering. Can we go on to the next slide? This is a snapshot of the service list, and you can see we're capturing things like who delivers this service, what's the service called by that organization, what is the user that it serves, can the user journey be completed digitally, and is the service delivered internally or externally? But Marie, shall we just briefly turn to the list itself? Great. So you can see here, this is coming together as a sort of database of the range of services that Welsh Government delivers. This is very much a work in progress. It only represents the areas of government that we've spoken to so far, but we think it quite well does represent the range of services to that definition that we shared that are being delivered. I'll call out now that is absolutely not, or this doesn't capture all of the things that these organisations do. For example, it doesn't capture the policy work that Welsh Government does. It also doesn't capture some of the more operational things that, for example, Health and Care is doing. So we haven't defined running an A&E itself as a service in this way. It's more, so this is just a list of the things that meet that definition. This is one of the key data sets or data sources, that we're using to get to that costed roadmap. And we're thinking about how we can best kind of categorize and structure the data that we have here. Adding on different types of user need and using that as a way to understand opportunities, also thinking about what are the different components that are used across many of these different services as well. With that, should we go back to the slides? I think I'm now handing over to Rick.
Thank you, Henry and Marie. So following on from what Henry has just been saying and what he's been showing us with that kind of emerging list of services, one of the aims of the landscape review, as we mentioned earlier, is to help CDS build its own roadmap and also highlight opportunities for others in the Welsh public sector. We're thinking about the problems and opportunities that we're hearing about and how they suggest possible activities for CDPS ourselves and others. And so we've got a representative example of that on the screen now. We should note it's just an example. We're not saying we're going to do this one, but there are many more that we're picking up as we go. As Henry was saying, that list of services we have there is only the start of the conversation. So we've got more conversations over the coming weeks with the service focus groups, with other organisations, and that will really help us expand that list. We're never going to get to 100%, but it's going to be, I think, a good, chunky piece of work that will help to inform this. So we'll be, once we start to understand those problems and opportunities and the potential intervention types, and then the specific things and specific areas where CDPS can be involved, we'll be discussing that, helping whittle down that list with our CDOs and also with the team within CDPS and also with our board over the coming weeks. And then we hope to be able to talk more about that in a coming future show and tell, and we can share some more detail on that. But that's how the things are progressing. Move on to the next slide, Marie. Quick note about the technology survey. Thank you to those who've filled this in so far. We touched on this in our last show and tell. Some really good responses, really interesting conversations about the range of approaches that people are taking. We've now run through this with 4 organisations in detail, but we have a couple more responses as well. We have more planned in the next few weeks. And again, we look to provide an early view of findings of what we're hearing in one of our future show and tells. Looking then at the next steps, what we've got coming up in the next few weeks, those service focus groups, absolutely. We're going to have more of those. We'll be getting really into the heart of our core conversations with the services and those delivering services in the next few weeks. Hopefully more of the tech surveys, we mentioned on the previous slide, and we're also looking to expand more that conversation we're having within the team and with the board and more widely around the list of possible things that we could build into that roadmap. Obviously, we want you to come and hear more about this in our next show and tell, which is in a couple of weeks' time. We should say that the landscape review, this phase of it, runs until I think it's the 3rd week of November. So we are really coming towards the crescendo of activity, and so we should have lots to say in the next show and tell. If we can move on to the next slide, importantly, how do you get involved? For those that we haven't met with yet and perhaps we haven't reached out to you, please do get in touch if you'd like to be involved. There's an email address there. Always happy to hear from people. Specific asks for those we talked to already. I think many of the people who are responsible for technology are already in touch, but if there is any there that we still think we could be in touch with, you haven't done that already, please do that. And then encouraging your teams to join those focus groups we're talking about there. Most of those we've talked to already. We've highlighted potential slots where for the focus groups. If you're still waiting and wondering about kind of replying to that, please do come back to us and select one of those. We very much like to see and hear from you in those sessions. We've had some great sessions over the last couple of weeks, so I think it will be really valuable for those attending too, hopefully. And then lastly, to hear more about what we've been doing to date, we have the YouTube channel there with an incredibly long and complicated link. But of course, you can just go onto YouTube and search for CDPS Landscape Review, and it comes up with a nice list of easy videos. And that brings us to the end of our show and tell. So any questions from anyone on the call? Probably a question for Will. Did that answer you raised the issue of that we shouldn't reinvent the wheel if you've done some stuff already, and absolutely 100%. We would always come and understand what's out there first and discuss that.
Yeah, that's great, Rick. Thanks very much. I just wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to feed kind of our guidance and sort of standards conformance stuff in for you, because we've done a lot of work to develop that already, and I want to save you some time on that.
100%. Any questions from anyone else?
Hi, sorry. It's Emlyn here from Cardiff Council. Just a quick question, just in terms of the review, is there any aspect of it looking at around issues that councils or organisations may face in terms of digital exclusion? Is that being monitored anywhere? Some of the challenges and blockers and ways of overcoming this?
Henry, and I think this has come up in a couple of the conversations so far. So I'm not sure if you want to comment on that more deeply, but I think what we say is that we are having, as we said, two sets of conversations. First of all, at an organisation level, and that has come up at a broad level. But then I think what we're planning to do is, as we get into the focus groups, we can really hear about how the services are dealing with their particular issues around digital exclusion. We know that, for example, some of the previous organisation level conversations we had, are starting to touch on that. But I think we're probably, if we can, I mean, it's a good note actually, Emily. If we can kind of pick up that one on the future show and tell, we can definitely come back to that and what we've heard.
Okay, great, thanks.
Henry, anything to add to that one?
Not particularly. I would just say, so our survey asked a broad range of questions around, particularly around the different service standards. And again, I think digital exclusion, and particularly accessibility, comes into that. It's definitely something we've heard from different user groups. For example, we met with the service owner for the Farming Connect service yesterday, whose primary user is the farming community, of which many are 50 plus, and they talked about the different ways, how that's been a challenge for them, and the different ways that they're getting people online and using that digital service. So it's definitely something which is coming out of the conversations we've had. We've not yet done the analysis on everyone to see kind of the trends or where that's more or less of an issue, but we will do that.
Eamon, is there a particular reason that you were picking that one out? Is that something that Cardiff are focusing on in particular?
Well, just selfishly from my point of view, when we have considerations around digital first, digital by default, in terms of policy positions, digital exclusion or digital deprivation are particular challenges, and it varies around the city. you know, as to where it impacts the most. And I'm just wondering if there's any learns from this piece of work and conversations that could be adopted.
Yeah, so I think, you know, as we hear more, we'll make sure we come back to you and share that specifically.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any questions from elsewhere? No, I think if that is the last we'll hear, then I think let's bring that to a close there. Many thanks for all of your time, and looking forward to hearing and talking to you all again shortly. Thank you.
Thanks all.